Hello, everybody. Welcome to our IDEA Café, Getting Started with IDEA. My name is Marisol Mata. I am the program manager, one of the program managers for the Plant Protection Program for the association, and I am the staff liaison for the IDEA committee. And I am very excited about today's event. And to kick us off, Ben Fuda, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy the event.
Yes, well, on behalf of the entire APGA IDEA committee and my co-organizers, welcome to this edition of our IDEA Cafe. Again, on behalf of the association, it's my pleasure and our pleasure to welcome all of you. My name is Ben Fuda, he, him, his, and I will be serving as moderator and host for the first half of our discussion today. So we're joined today by panelists Chrissy Deal and Michelle Matthews, and we were looking forward to welcoming Marcia Caton Campbell as well. Unfortunately, she's had a last-minute conflict arise and won't be able to join us today. But as luck would have it, if 2020 taught us anything, it was the power of pivoting. And I also happen to serve on Marcia's board. So when we get to the introduction slides here in just a moment, I will do my best to give an overview of Rooted. Of course, it's not coming from an operational level, but I'll do my best to represent the good work they're doing nonetheless. But otherwise, once we get to the open Q&A discussion of our forum, we'll really look forward to hearing from Chrissy and Michelle as well. My co-presenters and co-hosts today, Yvonne Garcia-Bardwell of Denver Botanic and Kavina Devereaux of Desert Botanic are here with us as well, and they will be taking on the second half when we again open the floor up to questions from all of you today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started. There we go. Again, I mentioned our panelists. You'll be able to see their contact info again here at the end of the presentation, but if you want to, again, see who we all are and where folks are coming from, this is your quick overview. Also, as a note on myself, I have no garden next to my name because I am currently gardenless, but most recently was director of the Allen Centennial Garden at UW-Madison. So we're going to kick off introductions with Michelle. So Michelle, if you want to take us away and tell us a little bit about Arlington.
So this is a little slide that shows Arlington Garden. We are located on a 2.5 acre parcel in the middle of downtown Pasadena. It shows we are here, which I think it kind of illustrates the point of the 710 freeway, which was supposed to come through like a 4.5 mile area, and the garden was supposed to be a staging ground for the Caltrans freeway. And so one of the things that we celebrate is to say, instead of a freeway, we built a garden. We have about 400 trees, a myriad of climate appropriate Mediterranean plants. We are free and open to the public. And this year we're celebrating our 16th anniversary.
All right, and again, I will give a quick pitch here for Rooted. So Rooted is a sort of urban agriculture-based organization in Madison, Wisconsin. I've been on the board now for, I believe, 3 years, and also sort of helped to see the organization through a merger a couple of years ago. But that said, again, you can sort of see some of their operational snapshots here on this page, but they really are involved in a number of programs throughout the city of Madison. So everything from community gardens, supporting school garden networks. They operate a couple of community centers, both on the north and south sides of town. And so there's a lot of diverse activities happening. Again, the big news, which is sort of, again, I can speak to from my board perspective, at least, this Rooted was formed after a merger of two organizations about a year ago, and they were Center for Resilient Cities and then also Community Groundworks. Both of these organizations did very similar work, and so they recognized those sort of strengths in one another, combined their strengths together, and now are this, again, sort of city-spanning organization doing a lot of person of color forward work, as they describe it. Again, as we dive into the presentation and hear more from our panelists, if you have any questions for Marcia specifically, she said she's welcoming emails. If you have questions about more of their work, she'd love to hear from anyone. And with that, I will turn it over to Chrissy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for welcoming me today. I'm Chrissy Deal, and I have a very long title and a relatively new title at the Bumpy Stanton Foundation. I direct our Livingston Fellowship program, which is, as it states in the slide, for nonprofit leaders in the Denver metro area. And I also manage our art and social change grant making. And I say it's a mouthful and also new because I just came to the foundation last fall in October. And so am learning a lot, and but have been a longtime community member and actually have grown up here in Colorado. So have known of Bonfils Stanton and have been watching the foundation's work specifically as it relates to equity. So just wanted to provide a little bit of background about the foundation, its origins, which I won't repeat, but you can see in the slide there. I wanted to be sure to include that link to our equity journey, which I think does a really nice job of really sort of detailing what that has looked like for the foundation, going back to about 2014, and the different elements that I'll talk about. But I also come to this conversation today as an engaged community member, and less wearing my Bonfils Stanton hat, and really just as a person that's worked in cultural organizations for decades and have, as a Latina, has really been interested in advancing equity and inclusion in these cultural spaces. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that has looked like in my experience, and am eager to also hear from you all about your experiences as well. So thank you for welcoming me today.
All right, so we're going to jump into sort of our prequel discussion format. Essentially, we have a few icebreaker and questions and such to really kick off this discussion and get us rolling. Again, I should also mention that the topic for this particular event came as a result of our last IDEA Cafe in December, where we essentially introduced our full IDEA committee and our work and our intent behind this committee. So my first question, Michelle, we'll start with you, is sort of if you could tell us a little bit about where was the tipping point for making change towards IDEA in your organization? Sort of what did that look like, or what spurred that work?
Well, I think it definitely, occurred last summer in June. I live in downtown Pasadena, and I live next to Pasadena City Hall, and there were many protests going on in the area, and just it was a really powerful moment for me to talk about the fact that we cannot remain silent. So I ended up writing a letter, and at the encouragement of our programs manager, Paloma Avila, she was participating in a Annenberg Foundation tech grant and was doing some racial equity training, and she encouraged me to write something that was very personal. So we ended up, releasing a statement that was a staff-oriented letter that went to our newsletter of some 2,000 subscribers. And basically, I think that kind of kicked off the process. I ended up speaking with some local other nonprofit EDs and kind of talking to them about what their process was. We did a community coaching with community collective coaching with our board and staff after that letter. And then also I attended a workshop with Aspire Group, developing a DEI policy training with Diane Burby of Aspire Group. And then we ended up consulting with Aspire Group. I think Diane has a really nice way of helping us kind of understand the journey of DEI and IDEA work. And then we just released our statement this past weekend. So it's been a very quick, I guess, process and intensive process, but I think necessary, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done as an organization, both on the staff and the board side.
And Chrissy, why don't you tell us about where your journey started? So back in, if it was 2014 or before, sort of what that looks like for your organization.
Sure. So this is where it'll get a little tricky, because I actually I want to focus on a more broad community-based approach that has less to do with Bonfi-Stanton's specific journey, which is why I thought I'd throw the link out there. And if folks have questions related to what they see, I'm happy to answer those questions. But the reason I wanted to focus on this other initiative that I am involved in is because it actually involves the gardens, the Denver Botanic Gardens. So, and as I was thinking about the question of what where the tipping point was, if we could see everybody else, I have to think that just the year 2020 was probably that. If you know, for many organizations and many communities, interestingly enough, for the work that I'd like to describe, ours goes back a little bit further, and this was probably around 2017, 2018. Actually, it was 2017, and it was after you know, new administration, election, you know, sort of like taking getting a sense of the landscape and what's possible. And so that prompted some discussions with some senior leaders in our community that serve as trustees of anchor organizations, cultural institutions in the Denver area. One of those trustees is Dr. Patricia Baca, who was the first Latina appointed to the board at the Denver Botanic Gardens and has pretty much served on every board in the Denver metro area, and is now on the Denver Art Museum and the Denver Center for the Performing Arts Board. She and I had a nice bowl of tomato soup one afternoon and just started thinking about this work, this equity and inclusion, diversity, whatever you wanted to call it back in 2017, and what this has looked like from her vantage point as a trustee, as a board member, and who has been really bringing these issues up as a Latina leader, you know, for decades. And so was very curious to hear and understand her perspectives about what potentials she saw, and if there was any way that we could create a broad coalition of other trustees of color that serve on the boards of the 5 anchor institutions in Denver to really begin to learn from each other and to build that momentum. So the tipping point was over tomato soup, and it was a few years ago, but it really was an acknowledgement that if this work is going to stick, if you seek to have the kind of impact that you want to in your community, in your organization, the buy-in must be from the board, from the jump, right? From the get-go. So that has really been a process of now for the past, you know, few years or several years now, 3 years or so, you know, really engaging with these ambassadors, these champions for equity and inclusion, and discovering, you know, how they're viewing the work and how they, as the leaders of these organizations, resource the work and also lead by example to inspire the staff and sort of see that kind of ripple out into the community. So look forward to fleshing that out a little bit more, but that's the tipping point for us.
Excellent. And so our sort of follow-up question then is thinking about momentum. And so a lot of folks, when they were registering for this webinar, sort of indicated that maybe they formed a working group, or you know, there's some movement or some conversation internally about this, but sort of how can people start to think about momentum and traction and sort of really moving forward, you know, past we need to, you know, that realization of we need to act, we need to change, but really, you know, starting to move forward. So Michelle, why don't you carry forward with your story on that topic?
Well, I think, you know, how do you build momentum? I think it kind of starts with me. It started with having the courage to be the uncomfortable one first. So, you know, putting myself in a position where I was like, well, I don't really know how this is going to go. It's a little scary. It's uncomfortable. And so I think that is a good place to start. And Paloma also shared some materials with me about courageous communication, which is believing, thinking, feeling, and acting, you know, being vulnerable, and also listening to feedback, having difficult conversations, asking the questions that you maybe haven't asked before or didn't want to ask, and then also seeking out thought partners, seeking out people who will support you in these efforts and will be allies in terms of saying like, look, I'm really trying to figure this out, can you help me figure this out, and not necessarily knowing that you're going to have all the answers right away. So I really think it's a process of discovery that starts with being uncomfortable in a lot of ways, and then understanding that it's okay to be uncomfortable.
Chrissy, what about you and your momentum story and journey?
Well, we actually, so much of what Michelle just said were my talking points too. And so that's at the core of it. So I do want to touch on that, but as I'm thinking about how this group of board members have come together and how they've kind of gelled and formed, that we stick with it. COVID was a hiccup for our meeting, schedule, and I serve as a facilitator. So they have a support, somebody that can kind of continue to move these discussions along. So kind of having that resource built into an effort. And if it can be, I don't need to be compensated. This is my heart's work. I would have done it, and I had been doing it, just sort of as something that was of interest to me. But I think it's just important to call out, like having that person, continue to hold the notes, hold the information to kind of refresh. It seems sort of logistical and maybe something like, oh yeah, we'll figure that out. But that actually is an important piece of continuing to build, right? So you're not continuing to trying to catch up and sort of sliding back, right? So we also, the discussions are really shared learning opportunities. It's where they come together, where they share their wins, their epiphanies, best practices, questions, vent their frustrations. And so structuring these conversations as such so that they're sharing that's happening, and they're and the space encourages that. From that emerged a definition of what this group intends to do, what their purpose is, what their goals are related to becoming a more equitable cultural landscape and creating that here in Denver. So focusing on goals such as organizational practices, developing progressive policies, effectively engaging people, and promoting meaningful participation. So alliteration also helps a little bit when you're trying to get a group to sort of like gel around, what the goals, what the principles are of this team that you're pulling together. But that's what they would emerge in these discussions. And then I'll say, sort of piggybacking off of what Michelle touched on, it is absolutely all about trust, right? And I've heard different variations of this term, but actually I Googled it and I went back, I was like, where did I first hear it? I read it in a blog. It's called Equity. I'll find it and I'll put it in the chat or share it as a resource. But there in 2015, I read the phrase, partnerships happen at the speed of trust, right? Or I've heard other leaders say equity happens at the speed of trust. And so that trust is built in the way that Michelle described, right? Is asking those questions, operating with reciprocity as a core value, that there is wealth and knowledge and wisdom from all partners, and how can you draw that in and offer something back, right? And so there's that exchange. And then really just, that willingness to listen and to authentically incorporate what you're hearing into your plan as you're developing your different, programs or internal shifts, whatever those things might be. The other source that I often think of when I think of this kind of position and the opportunity that this work presents organizations is the book Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva. And he talks about listening, and he says, listen, acknowledge the wisdom of those excluded and exploited by the system who possess exactly the perspective and wisdom needed to fix it. So it's really that kind of, that creating a welcoming space for collaboration, for partnership. And I saw that even happen with these board members, right? But I think this is applicable also to the kind of outward facing community work that a lot of organizations are seeking to initiate and learn more about at this point as well.
So our final sort of pre-made question for our panelists is thinking about surprise. These are journeys where there is a lot of unknown and some uncertainty for many of us. And so we're wondering what surprised you along the way in this journey. So Michelle, why don't you lead us off with the surprises along the way and sort of what did that look like and how did you adapt and move through those?
I think it was, going through the process was definitely a very, healing journey and a powerful journey, because I think that it really revealed to us, how as an organization, we have been doing DEI well in some ways, and we have not. I think also looking back at some of my notes and the things that I was thinking about and looking at, it was definitely a process of learning and growth. And I feel like it's revealed to me that, the garden and our struggle is very reflective. We're a microcosm of what's going on in the world in a national scale. I think what's also surprised me too is that I've heard, or I guess lack of urgency maybe from other environmental organizations or just lack of urgency in every conversation that climate change and environmental justice is urgent, that we have an urgent problem. And I guess I'm still surprised that this is not more in the dialogue of organizations that are not environmental. And then I think that's it. That's what
All right, Chrissy, over to you.
So as it relates to this group of trustees of color, I wish I could say I was surprised by how few BIPOC trustees there are, but I wasn't surprised, right? Like, it's a very intimate group across 5 institutions. There are very few. One thing that I guess has kind of come from the perspectives of the participants in these conversations is that they are saying they're kind of they don't know of any other group like this, right? We had a museum, I guess it was a staff member at the time from the association, I always forget the name, the AAM, Alliance of American Museums, I think, reach out and talk to us about this coalition and what started it, what prompted it, what are we learning? And we thought, well, this should be happening more, right? More BIPOC leaders hopefully will begin to engage this way. Well, then comes 2020, and guess what? That's happening, right? So I'm encouraged by that, but it was, a few years back, sort of like, I think this is like a very novel thing, but very useful, right? To be sharing these perspectives rather than just having the conversations live in that one boardroom, that they're, sharing information across organizations to really move the needle for every organization outside of the 5. We have 300 plus cultural organizations just in the Denver metro area alone, right? And so that's the goal, right? It's not to just institute change and see that happen for those 5. It's to really serve as a inspiration for what can happen all across the board, right? From all volunteer run organizations to organizations with multi-million-dollar budgets. So So that was a little bit of it was a surprise and then sort of an opportunity, but one that now I hear communities are actually acting on. So, so that's been encouraging. And then I will add, just from the perspective of Bonfi Stanton, we come to this work with humility and an acknowledgement that we have not figured it out. You don't do that, right? You don't figure it out. You continue to grow, learn, and develop over time. But when we do kind of get all woohoo, right? Like, then you feel some heat for something that you either, missed or you were making assumptions about, and you get checked. And that happens, right? And that's part of being vulnerable and sort of like acknowledging that without that kind of feedback and that those perspectives being shared with us, we will become stagnant again. And we have to continue to invite that. But sometimes it can come at you and maybe not when you're expecting it. So that can be a surprise as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for sharing your stories and your experience and perspective with us. We appreciate it. So now I'm going to turn over the floor to my colleagues, Kavina and Yvonne, and they're going to start asking some of the questions that you all have been sending in via the Q&A. I think, Kavina, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off with this portion. Take it away.
Thank you, Ben. Michelle and Chrissy, can you share about the discovery process and some of the uncomfortable conversations / questions you asked?
So questions that we asked during the discovery process?
Yes.
I think, I think I would have to go back to my notes and look at Diane's, the way that she led us through the journey. Some of the questions were, what is your story, and and where did we begin? So I think it was just kind of going back and looking at the history of the organization and looking at real things that we've already accomplished, and she did it in a really specific way that led us through the journey. And it took a while before we kind of unearthed it. So it's a process. And I'd have to go back through my notes to find some of the specific questions, which I can provide maybe afterwards, as well as some other materials, which might be helpful in the process.
I think, again, the experience with the BIPOC trustees is it's a unique one, because the leadership is coming from members of communities who are often the recipients of philanthropy, right, or of services. So it's sort of flipping it on its head, which I love, right, which is why I so enjoy and am honored to be a part of those, just to be fly on the wall, the person taking notes in those conversations. So the conversations are different in that room. But I would say that what was applicable to that group and to many other initiatives that organizations may be in the midst of or wanting to explore is really understanding what is it for you. If you're saying we want to, be more inclusive or equitable or accessible or whatever the word is, unpack that. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to function as an equitable organization? Are you talking about, okay, so for, from a programs perspective or from a hiring, HR perspective, or like, and hear from the different stakeholders in your working group or your task force, or however you have it structured, and get those thoughts. Because what equity means to me, it could be very different, and likely is, from the person that's sitting next to me who works in a completely different department and may not be a 40-something-year-old Latina, right? So just even just defining what it is, that is actually, that's work that you can do on your own, right? Where that's a great way to kind of get to prime the pump, right? To begin to have those conversations and to practice having conversations with each other if you haven't had discussions like that before. And the things that you uncover and you discover through that process, then they may need that outside consultant or that, a perspective, somebody who's completely objective, who, comes in to an organization and where this is their expertise, but they come to the organization saying, oh, you guys have done a little bit of this, right? Like, thank you for letting me know this is where you're at. I can work with this, let's move forward, right? So I think defining and better understanding to the best of your ability what it is for you as an individual, as a team, as an institution, and what it means potentially to those external stakeholders is a real opportunity and an interesting place to start.
And I sent a link that goes to Tamika Butler's blog on Medium, and then which it links to Confronting Power and Privilege for Inclusive, Equitable, and Healthy Communities. And it's a great document, and it looks at, if you click on the link and you go to number 2, it has a lot of questions. Understand the role that power plays in your current work. Questions: what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What decisions, policies, and practices have historically contributed to the problem? What is the root cause of the problem? So I hope that's a great resource for everyone.
And I will pass it to Yvonne.
Hi, the next question that had come in was, what do you want garden CEOs to know and to do?
I can jump in. So Brian has, been running, is Yvonne's boss at the Denver Botanic Gardens. And Brian is a recognized champion of this work. There's a reason Yvonne is there and that she's been there for 10 years. I think she could speak to that as well. I am learning this through those discussions with other trustees, but I also am a resident here and I see it, right? So Brian is a co-conspirator. He is an ally. He speaks to this work authentically, and also comes to it with the acknowledgement that there's always more that can be done, right? But you immediately saw his commitment through the diversification of the board and key leaders being invited to come into this work and to contribute in ways that are meaningful to them. So there's a real partnership again with Brian, and that partnership has actually rippled out way far beyond the gardens, right? To really impact the broader cultural community. So I just think that having that, being open, and I'm sure I can't speak for him, and maybe he's somewhere behind the scenes here, I'm not sure, but I'm sure there were moments where, every leader sort of questions like, ooh, is this the right path? Like, am I doing it right? Am I leading the way that I should? Am I too much out front? Do I need to step back, right? You got to just give it a go, right? And I'm sure, like we all do, discover along the way. So, my sense from leaders who have really, begun to systematize what equity and inclusion looks like in their institutions are full partners in the work. There's a presence, and they're visible. They're visible as it relates to it, and they're there leading alongside their board, their staff, and the community believes it. They see it and they believe it, and it makes a difference.
I'll just add to Chrissy to what she said, because I work here and I know the process that he's gone through, but I'll add that you have to be okay with being uncomfortable. It's going to get uncomfortable. And so you have to work through that, and it's not going to be easy, but you have to be okay in that discomfort to really get the work done. And that's all I wanted to add.
Just the question again, really quick, so I can.
Sure. It is, what do you want garden CEOs to know and to do?
I think I would start by reading Tamika Butler's blog. I think it's very powerful. I think it's very useful. I think she gives a lot of great, powerful information. I think start there and see what she has to say, and that will give you a lot of different directions that you can go.
And this question is for everyone here. Does anyone have any suggestions for expanding financial and non-financial accessibility programs?
I will actually jump in with this one. I think it's a super fascinating question. And if anyone wants to jump in, cut me off, go for it. Coming from formerly a free open garden with no admission, you know, this was something that we thought about at UW-Madison quite a bit. And I think I understand sort of, I think we're the premise of the question, but I also think I would expand that question to say, what is authentically welcoming? Because free is not the same as welcome. And I think that it gets at sort of what Chrissy was saying, was sort of really defining what IDEA means for your organization. But again, if for gardens that are gateless, we still had barriers and we still had invisible keep out signs, even if we didn't see them or recognize them. We were trying to welcome college students and 26 dorms outside of our gates, and you know, kids would walk by every day and think it was a private residence. And so we had to do a lot to work past those sort of invisible walls. And Michelle, I don't know if you as another urban gateless garden have any thoughts on that, but I would just sort of say, I think certainly there's a financial implication to all of this, but I think the question is even bigger potentially.
I think we're still figuring it out. We are also, I didn't mention, but we are a very small garden. I think when I started, the budget was $50,000 a year. Now we're close to $200,000 a year. So we're super bootstrappy, like scrappy, you know, figuring it out as we kind of go along. And so that's still in process for us, I guess. We're still looking for support. I know. And I guess, you know, in terms of the other question about what do you want CEOs to do? I would love it if the Huntington CEO came to us and said, hey, you guys, you know, what can we do to help support you? You know, the Huntington is in San Marino. They're a $200 million, you know, garden. And I think, you know, also 200 acres. So I would say, I would love it if they said to us, like, do you guys need some help or support? How can we help and support you? That would be awesome.
I'll ask the next question. Do you have any tips for engaging coworkers in these conversations when they may not understand the need?
Yeah, that's going to happen everywhere, right? Like that is, that's an opportunity to welcome your colleagues in a variety of ways, right? So, and just acknowledging just how people learn differently, right? Like what resonates with me is, you know, watching a video. I don't want to necessarily read a document, but like so maybe experimenting with different ways of having these discussions, that maybe you are watching a clip, a video clip, or maybe you are reading a document, and you're kind of, you know, sharing in during part of a staff meeting or something like that. Or you're setting a very specific time for staff or the team to focus on equity alone, and not always trying to shoehorn equity into the last 15 minutes of your staff meeting, right? So, so I think that's, you know, that's one way of doing it. I think then this also speaks to the expertise that consultants can bring, and Michelle is, you know, speaking to her experience being guided in this way, right? And being exposed to these different resources. And, you know, that's ideal, you know, when you're able to really lean on somebody to kind of direct and read a room and sort of, you know, reach into their bag of tricks to like motivate, or to kind of, you know, acknowledge that this may not resonate with everybody at this point in time, but nevertheless, there's a reason that it's happening. Because for organizations to remain relevant in a changing United States, right, this has to be baked into your DNA. It has to become a part of how you operate. And otherwise, in many cases, organizations will run the risk of being completely disconnected and irrelevant to these changing communities. So it really, behooves everybody to think about this, to explore this, and to figure out what their connecting points will be with the work. But you do have to, get creative, and it is very personal. And so when it gets personal, people react the way that they would in all kinds of environments. And so you just gotta acknowledge that and lean on the expertise that you have access to, whether it's through a cohort, right? Whether it's through other gardens or through, neighborhood, a coalition of to begin to kind of share best practices. I'm like, oh goodness, here I am. What do we do? And because I know there's more and more of those kinds of groups coming together because people are working on this now. So there's a lot of learning and sharing to be had, I think.
I can speak to that from a getting feedback from the public side and also from the board side. Having coaches, having advisors, having people who can help facilitate difficult conversations are great because they're professionals and that's what they're trained in. And, we participated in a community collective coaching with a group in Chicago. And I was really impressed about how, well they helped to facilitate this conversation between myself, the staff, and the board. And I'm not trained in those things. So I think, seeking professional help and consult and engaging these dialogues and really it can be really powerful and also cathartic. So just get help if you need it. Yeah, and invest in it, and make it a professional development. We are a small organization, but professional development of myself, development of my staff, and because we received this grant and, my programs manager was participating in these workshops and trainings, she really provided support to me to help enable me to, kind of push these things in a lot of ways. So also look to other, look to the people who do get it and start with them and kind of strategize on ways that you can get, get this person on board. And also, like what, talk about what is the mission and vision of your organization and say, like, are we all focused on the same thing? Like, sometimes you have to find the common ground in that regard and help them understand that it's you're both working towards the same place, I guess, or the same thing or the same goal, the same shared goal and shared values.
Just one thing I might add to what Michelle said about, the working with colleagues, right, and partnerships. I do think that it's important to, again, going back to that concept of really coming together as equals, regardless, maybe if it is Huntington, 200 million or whatever you said, and then Michelle, your garden, like, okay, so there's a difference in your budget, right? But you have an experience that is rich, right? That is meaningful. And there would be a benefit, in my view. I've been to the Huntington Garden, so I know. But there would be a benefit for them to be connected to a garden like yours, right? And so, like, coming to those discussions as equals, and to also be mindful of, especially at this time, where there is such a desire among leaders and community and staff and community members to really lean into this and figure it out and get it done, to look to the smaller, sometimes often under-resourced organizations for guidance on how to do it. They're busy, right? They've been doing it. It's not to say that they don't necessarily want to be a partner or to kind of offer that sort of support and insight, but there has to be a give and a take, right? So they're tapped, I can tell you, just in terms of cultural organizations led and serving BIPOC communities or other underrepresented communities, they've always had a lot going on, right? And so there has to be an equal partnership in those types of collaborations, and just to be mindful of that when you're considering who might we connect with, who could we learn from, what might that look like?
And pay them. Yes, I know. So we paid all of our consultants and all of our thought partners. So, and again, super small budget, but we, work with them, say, we have this, can you work with this? And it's important to compensate, people for the work that they're doing and providing you with. And that's one of the things that I've experienced a lot in, nonprofit organizations. I've been in many different nonprofit organizations throughout my career. And there's often a martyr mentality, a sacrifice mentality, and that comes from privilege. So if you want to diversify, your organization, you have to understand that not everybody can work with that. So you have to pay people for their work and compensate them adequately, including interns.
What are steps organizations can do to genuinely move forward to be an ally to the community when it comes to and making sure you avoid mission creep? How do you make sure that what you're doing in the community is sustainable and not just lip service?
I can go, Michelle. I feel like you have the direct experience. It kind of goes back to an earlier comment about to view the work as being on the side or separate from the organization's, main focus is problematic. If that's how you're approaching it, is sort of as an add-on, then you will have difficulty. So this has to be integrated. I often talk about, or I have in the past, talk about it as if it's sort of something like a capital campaign, right? Where like you're focused on it, you've got goals, you're, touching base on this thing all the time. Give it the same attention. And it will transform your organization. It will transform it. It will be messy, absolutely, right? And I think a capital campaign is kind of messy as well, right? So or traumatic, or all of those things. But you have to prepare for transformation if you're going to do this and be successful in doing it. That's what you need to be prepared for. And so that integration and having it being a standing agenda item, or creating it's part of the standing staff meeting, but then it also has its own time every other week or whatever your schedule might be. That is key, because the idea is for it to just completely inform everything you do, how you operate, how you fundraise, who your donors are, who your board members are, the communities that you serve. Programs are sort of like ahead of a lot of, I think that's where the focus has traditionally been most immediately, is on programs, right? But there's all the other pieces that everybody on this call are very familiar with, that also will benefit from a process to really examine how to become a more equitable organization when it's done successfully and correctly.
So I guess, so the question is basically, how do you walk the talk that you're talking about? So, I think that's a difficult question. And it endures, I think this journey of transformation. And, I think that the pandemic and, has really taught us about the importance of outdoor space, the importance of free public space, the importance of community, the importance of being able to gather when we can't gather, and going to the garden to me was it kept me sane. And I think, you know, so how can we, you know, take our privilege, take our power, how can we share our resources, and how can we help, you know, make other gardens or landscapes be climate appropriate across the nation, and get rid of lawn as an industrial, you know, the largest industrial agriculture in the country. So, you know, I think environmentalists really understand the power of regenerative agriculture and gardening. So we understand these things from a specific kind of technical way, but now it's about, okay, how do we diversify our people as much as we encourage ecological diversity in our gardens. So that's a really roundabout way of my answer, but I think it's important to you know, have your people diversity be reflected in your organization, and if that's not happening, then you got to work on it.
And that's the next question, is any ideas for engaging a diverse volunteer base? And then there's another question that came up, which I think can go hand in hand, but how do you know if your garden is unwelcoming? So unwelcoming, and then how do you engage a more diverse volunteer base? But I probably think that it goes beyond that, and it's becoming a welcoming environment to all.
So that's something we continue to struggle with. I mean, we have we had volunteer Tuesdays because that's when the founder was volunteering, but a lot of people have jobs, and so they weren't able to come on Tuesdays. So we've started to do a Sunday volunteer activity. You know, the pandemic really forced us to rethink some programming. So we started to do some Instagram live interviews, and we're also thinking about how we can do some more virtual programming. So we're still working on it, you know, and I think one of the things with gardening organizations and gardens is that people who garden have homes and properties and own land, and people who don't garden a lot of times just don't have access to that. So, you know, it's a question that we're still trying to figure out, and I don't know if we've quite answered it yet, but it's, you know, it's sometimes it could be just sending out a survey, like what do you think you'd like to learn? Just ask questions, I think, from your local community and neighbors, and see what they want to learn. And you might find that a lot of people want to learn something that you didn't think about or you're not offering. So.
And Chrissy, if you don't mind, I want to jump in super quick too. I think my answer to the earlier one may have prompted this welcoming question. I think it's really important to clarify the audience you are trying to reach out to more deeply. So to say, we just want to be welcoming is great, but it's also such a broad brush to paint with that it's difficult to take specific action and to really identify what the people and communities you want to authentically bring into your organization, what speaks to them, what's relevant, what matters. And so, you know, I know some organizations that said, you know, we specifically want to work with Latinx female artists. I mean, be specific. You know, and again, in our case, it was college students between 18 and 22 on this campus. We really narrowed it in. And then the next step right after that is to find champions within those groups who can sort of represent their peers as a whole, but who can also tell you, this is what welcome looks like to me and to my peers. So in our case with college students, we said, well, what would a college garden that's authentically welcoming to college students look like? And so we hired more students. We said, plan some programs. And so we had therapy dogs as our very first event with students. And it was 600 kids in an hour and a half. And it just totally blew our mind. But we put the students in the driver's seat, and we empowered them to make decisions that their peers would respond to. But I think clarifying audience is really, really helpful. And again, identifying champions and then putting those champions as co-creators in what you're doing, not just saying, oh, you know, tell us what you think you want and then we'll still go do it. Like, I don't speak college student, let them speak, let them decide and tell you what matters. So that's my 10 cents. Chrissy, if you have anything else to add.
I don't. I think those are such great examples, and it just goes back to the earlier point that Michelle made and what I touched on, which is, you're listening, right? You're listening, and you're listening with the intention to actually learn and change what you're doing, to implement change based on what you've heard, right? So those are great and awesome examples, and that's a really cool event that you had.
And we'd also encourage you to check out the discussion forum on the APJ website. I think a lot of these questions, our broader community certainly may have some insight and input for all of us in this. And so some of us on the IDEA committee will start to post these questions into the forum. But again, if there's something that you want more answers on, you want more discussion on, we really encourage you to go there for more information as well. So I think maybe Kavina, I think you were up for asking the next question. So again, we'll keep going for about 15 minutes or so, and I'll give us maybe a couple-minute warning as we're coming into the final minutes.
How do you suggest introducing IDEA concepts to key and other volunteers, and how that impacts the work they are involved in? Volunteers for some gardens tend to be older and whiter and want to keep things as they are.
That's a good question. I think, for me, I always say, don't talk about politics, religion, money, sex at the dinner table. Don't talk about landscaping, because landscaping is very political. And gardening is very political. I think it really speaks to, people's kinds of personal relationship with nature, whether they think it should be dominated and controlled. I guess I would recommend reading, books. There's another book that I can share with you. That's an excellent book about how gardens need to change. And so I think just encouraging them to read and learn if they're willing and able.
I think I worked at the Denver Art Museum for a spell, about 7 years, a while back now, but the docent core that's what kept that place running, frankly, right? So I remember even thinking about this issue. This is like in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think one idea, I have no idea if this is helpful, but volunteers are often, the first representatives of an organization that visitors meet and interact with, right? So perhaps like working with volunteers to kind of like gather their perspectives on interactions that they've had with visitors, whether it's could be positive, could be like uncomfortable, could be sort of, or you may have gotten feedback about how a visitor interacted with a volunteer, and not to sort of say, well, here's an example of what not to do, but just to fold that knowledge into a learning. And I'm assuming that there are opportunities for volunteers to continually be trained and connect with each other, and they're social. So like to be creative in how you're making it real for them, because they have real experiences probably every single time that they're there, right? Either like with the public or with staff, and use like stories to begin to introduce these ideas and this this priority that to become more inclusive and representative and diverse, equitable, all of the words, how that has become a priority for the organization and what that means as it relates to their important role, right? So that's just a thought. Like, I think stories are so compelling. And if they can be personal, if you've got some that are open to offering that, and to sort of participating in that way, that may be a great place to just begin to have those discussions where there isn't sort of, and then this is the thing you need to learn, right? It's really just like wow, I didn't really think of that, right? But I can't discount what you said because this is your story. This is your experience. And I'm hearing you. I may be confused by it or uncomfortable or whatever, but I'm hearing you, you know? So that's one idea that comes to mind that I have found to be very impactful with other groups of volunteers myself as a board member, you know, with folks who are, you know, 20 years older than me, you know, diverse backgrounds. It was stories that really, you know, got us to kind of be on the same page.
Maybe we'll elaborate a little bit more. There's a question that came in that says, when you speak of it getting uncomfortable, which is understandable, what skills do you think staff and board need to effectively deal with that discomfort? In other words, do you think there is skill building that needs to be done prior to those uncomfortable conversations?
Yes, again, I think, you know, having a facilitator, having somebody to help with those conversations was really valuable for us. You know, again, it's I think, like Chrissy said, trust and, you know, nothing, there's never a wrong answer. So being, you know, it's difficult because it, you know, it's allowing people to say uncomfortable things. And accepting that, but then also being able to kind of redirect or transform that into a positive statement or message or discovery. And again, I think the use of a facilitator, a professional, a trained professional is very valuable in this regard.
I agree. I think that I do have the questions open. So I kind of glanced and somebody asked, I think it's somewhat related question about if I've played that role in kind of facilitating those board and staff discussions. And, you know, being, you know, playing, you know, the role of a staff member, but a staff member who is responsible for advancing equity, and then, you know, feeling that I need to, you know, develop the equity agenda, and then sort of, you know, I may have a bad day. I may be tired right on the day that it's happening, and I may feel like, ooh, on any other day, I could have fielded that question in a different way. But right now, I just want to cry, or I want to step out of the room, or whatever, right? Like that's a lot of pressure on a person, or even like a small team of people. It's not to say that you can't build that internally, but that's an additional burden on a staff member, right? And you could have that person that's like, but that's my jam. Like I can do that, you know, and like that's what I want to do, and they could step forward, and that's great. But I just think of, you know, in communities, the Denver Foundation is our community foundation here, and I was on the board of the foundation for several years, but also they had been leading this inclusiveness work that's what they called it at the time, for, you know, it's been almost 20 years that they've been doing this work. And so they are a resource. They provide technical assistance. They have periodic, you know, convenings and workshops. They have, you know, in the past, they've had like a roster of consultants they've had. So I would like to imagine that there are, especially now, and probably even virtual versions of these kinds of resources that you can tap into if you haven't quite gotten to the part where you put this in your budget, because that will come when you're budgeting. but right now, you know, you got to try to make do with what you got. And but I do agree with Michelle, and we've hit on this several times, you know, being able to really draw from the expertise of somebody who can do this. And then, you know, after the hour-and-a-half meeting, it's sort of like, I got to go to my next client, right? And like sort of, but provide you those tools in that direction is preferable. So, but I would just encourage folks to look for those resources, to, you know, if a community foundation is a resource for you, also, you know, engaged in this work, maybe that's a place that you can also refer to other, you know, organizations that support nonprofits, they're out there, and and I'm trying to put other resources in the chat too, so that just to inspire and to maybe be helpful as you're building your plan together.
Awesome. Well, we are again approaching our time. We appreciate both of you taking a little extra time to extend over with us today and extend this discussion very much. Again, on behalf of the entire APGA IDEA Committee and the association itself, we appreciate your participation and sharing your time and knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me and inviting me to be a part of this discussion. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
And as one final reminder, this discussion will continue online. So please we direct you to the forum on APGA's website. I think there'll be a lot of great questions popping up there in the next couple of days, and also stay tuned for more information on upcoming IDEA cafes. We have more planned and there's more in the works. And also a lot of your questions feed into our deliberations on what the next topic should be. So we are definitely listening to everything you're asking, and we're really excited by the breadth and depth of your questions and your interest in this work. So thank you so much. And I don't know, Marisol, if you want to, or Yvonne or Kavina want to say any sort of final parting words or housekeeping, but I think we're there.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.